On the night of July 10th, 2006, Milena Del Valle was a passenger in a car moving through a tunnel beneath Boston Harbor. The tunnel was part of a project that had taken decades to plan, billions of dollars to build, and had already become a national symbol of government excess. Then the ceiling came down. 4 concrete panels, each weighing roughly 3 tons, tore loose from the roof and crushed the car below. Milena Del Valle died at the scene. The project responsible was the Big Dig. And by that point, it had already cost more than any highway project in American history. Boston is one of the oldest cities in America, and its streets show it. Unlike the grid-planned cities of the Midwest and West, Boston grew the way most medieval cities did, organically, along footpaths, cow tracks, and shorelines that were never designed with any larger plan in mind. By the time the automobile arrived in the early 20th century, the city's road network was already a tangle that no engineer would have drawn from scratch. After World War II, American cities rushed to modernize. The federal government was pouring money into the interstate highway system, and Boston, like most major cities, wanted its share. The solution planners landed on was the Central Artery, an elevated 6-lane expressway that would run directly through the middle of downtown, lifting traffic above the congested streets below. It opened in 1959, and almost immediately, people hated it. The structure cast long shadows over entire neighborhoods. It cut the North End and the waterfront off from the rest of the city, splitting communities that had existed for generations. It was loud, ugly, and disruptive. But beyond the aesthetics, there was a more pressing problem. The Central Artery had been designed to carry about 75,000 vehicles per day. By the early 1990s, it was carrying more than 200,000. Traffic crawled for over 10 hours a day. The accident rate was 4 times the national average. The annual cost to Boston's economy from delays, wasted fuel, and missed deliveries was estimated at around $500 million a year. Something had to change. The only question was how far anyone was willing to go to fix it. The idea that emerged was audacious to the point of seeming unreasonable. Rather than build a new elevated highway alongside the old one or widen what already existed, a small group of planners proposed something that had rarely been attempted at that scale anywhere in the world. They would bury the highway underground, tunneling beneath a living, breathing city, while keeping the existing elevated road open to traffic above. Then, once the new tunnels were finished, they would tear the old structure down entirely. The man most responsible for turning that idea into a real proposal was Fred Salvucci, Massachusetts Secretary of Transportation, under Governor Michael Dukakis. Salvucci had grown up in Brighton in the shadow of another highway project that had displaced his grandmother's neighborhood. He understood, in a personal way, what these structures cost the people who lived beside them. For him, removing the Central Artery was not just an engineering problem. It was something closer to unfinished business. Salvucci partnered with a crucial political ally in Washington. Thomas Tip O'Neill, the longtime Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, was a Boston Democrat with the kind of influence that could move federal money. Without O'Neill's support, the project would never have secured the congressional funding it needed. Together, they lobbied for what would become the Central Artery Tunnel Project, officially launched in 1982. The engineering firm Bechtel, paired with Parsons Brinckerhoff as designers, was brought in to manage construction. The initial cost estimate was placed at around $2.6 billion. The project was expected to be finished by 1998. Both of those numbers would turn out to be spectacularly wrong. Construction began in 1991, and almost immediately the project ran into conditions that no blueprint had fully prepared for. Boston's underground is not clean bedrock. Much of the city sits on colonial-era landfill, soft and unstable ground that had been built up over centuries by dumping rubble, refuse, and soil into the shallow harbor. Digging through it required constant reinforcement to prevent surrounding buildings from shifting or sinking. Engineers had to freeze sections of soil in place. using refrigeration pipes before they could safely excavate beneath them. Then there was the central challenge that made the whole operation uniquely difficult. The new tunnels had to be constructed directly beneath the existing elevated highway, while that highway continued carrying 200,000 vehicles a day above. Workers could not simply close the road. The city had to stay open. Contractors developed a system of temporary supports to hold the elevated structure in place while they dug beneath it, essentially rebuilding the ground floor of a building while the upper floors remained occupied. Engineers at the time compared it to performing open-heart surgery on a patient who was wide awake. Managing all of this was an organizational challenge, as much as an engineering one. The project involved over 100 individual construction contracts, dozens of separate companies, miles of existing subway lines, utility pipes, and communication cables that all had to be accounted for and worked around. Coordination failures were common. Designs did not always match conditions in the ground. Change orders piled up, and each one carried a cost. By the mid-1990s, it was becoming clear to those paying close attention that the original budget was no longer realistic. But that information was not always shared clearly with the public or with Congress. In 2000, the project's director, James Karasiotes, was fired. The reason was straightforward. He had failed to disclose a cost overrun of $1.4 billion to federal oversight officials. The announcement came just hours after those same officials had approved what they believed was the latest financing plan for the project. When the true numbers emerged, Congress was furious. An independent audit described the Big Dig as one of the most serious breaches of integrity in the entire history of the federal highway program. But the financial scandal was only part of the story. The construction itself was producing problems that money alone could not easily explain. Thousands of leaks were discovered in the tunnel walls and ceilings, and it later emerged that project managers had known about many of them for years without disclosing them publicly. Harbor saltwater was corroding steel supports and fixtures throughout the system. In 2006, 6 workers connected to the project's largest concrete supplier were arrested on fraud charges, accused of selling substandard concrete to the Big Dig at full price. The death of Milena Del Valle that same year brought everything into sharp focus. Investigators found that the ceiling panels had been held in place with epoxy anchors that were not rated for the sustained load they were carrying. The failure was not a sudden accident. It was the result of a known design problem that had not been corrected. The Massachusetts Attorney General sued Bechtel and Parsons Brinkerhoff. The two firms eventually settled in 2008, agreeing to pay $407 million in restitution. The project was finally declared complete in December 2007, nearly a decade behind schedule. The official construction cost was $14.8 billion. With interest on borrowed money factored in, the total bill climbed past $24 billion. When the elevated central artery came down, something unexpected happened to Boston. Light returned to neighborhoods that had lived in shadow for decades. The North End, once cut off from the rest of the city by a wall of concrete and noise, suddenly found itself connected again. The waterfront, long neglected and hard to reach, began drawing investment and foot traffic in ways it had not seen in generations. In place of the old highway, the city built what became known as the Rose Kennedy Greenway, a long corridor of parks, gardens, and public plazas running through the heart of downtown. Where trucks and exhaust fumes had dominated for 50 years, people now walked, sat, and gathered. It was, by any measure, a genuine transformation of urban space. The tunnels themselves delivered real results. Travel times through downtown Boston dropped from an average of nearly 20 minutes to under 3. The accident rate fell sharply. Logan Airport became directly accessible from the highway system in a way it never had been before. The city that had endured 2 decades of construction noise, dust, and disruption had something tangible to show for it. But the financial weight of the project did not disappear when the construction crews left. Massachusetts taxpayers were responsible for all cost overruns beyond the original federal cap, and those overruns were enormous. The debt reshaped the state's transportation budget for years, forcing cuts and delays to projects elsewhere that never made national headlines. The Big Dig remains the most expensive highway project in American history. It is a story about what a city can accomplish when it commits fully to repairing its own mistakes, and about what happens when ambition outruns the systems meant to keep it honest. Boston got its tunnels. The bill is still being settled.